We have been learning about the genre of literature called folk tales. We have already studied the folk tales that are called fairy tales. And I'll remind you that fairy tales often start with the words once upon a time. They often have royalty, which is kings or queens. The setting of a fairy tale is often a castle or a forest. In a fairy tale, there's usually a setup of a good character versus an evil character. In fairy tales, there's also usually some magic, and we often see things that happen in threes or in sevens. And then the last thing that happens in fairy tales is they often end with the words, and they lived happily ever after. Today, we're going to move on to another type of folktale called a fable. Fables are very short stories. One of the most important characteristics of a fable is that they have animals acting like people. And there are usually going to be three or less characters. Fables usually have a setting that is outside. In fables, there's usually one problem, and that problem usually happens when one character is tricking another character. And fables always have a lesson or a moral, and we usually discover what it is at the end. So, again, a fable is a type of a short folk tale that involves animals acting like people, and it teaches a lesson or a moral. Some very famous fables that you may have heard would include The Tortoise and the Hare, The Boy Who Cried Wolf, a very famous series called Aesop's Fables. I want to remind you one more time of the important features of a folk tale. Features or characteristics. They always have animals that act like people. They talk, they have feelings. There is always a moral or a lesson that we usually discover at the end. And remember, it often is a result of one character tricking another. The setting is usually outside in a fable. There are usually only two or three characters. The main character usually has some kind of a weakness. And the other characteristic or feature would be sometimes there's a setup between a villain and a hero that good versus evil. But the two most important that I always want you to keep in mind are animals acting like people, and there has to be a moral or a lesson in the story. So, as we go on and we continue to listen to fables and we continue to read fables, I want you to think about these features because we're going to have to really know what makes a fable a fable.